Welcome and welcome back. It's Rooted to Thrive, conversations that elevate our humanity podcast. It's your friend, your sister, Rochelle, aka Professor P. Today, we have Karl Morris. Karl is a candidate for Pennsylvania 3rd Congressional District, by the way, and a computer science professor at Temple University here in the Philadelphia area. He's been with them about 12 years. And listen, his research and teaching focus on artificial intelligence and system design. So, for over a decade, he's worked with communities across the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area to strengthen the pipeline of Black and Brown individuals into STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math, advancing diversity of identities and experiences in the field. Karl, thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation with me today. How you doing?
Thank you, Rochelle, for having me. I am doing great. Lovely fall weather has finally started to kick in, so
Yeah,
I'm having a great time.
that's wonderful. So, excuse me, our conversation today is on diversity as a method to address tech-enabled oppression and harm. And you have a rare combination of experiences as a computer science professor and a congressional candidate. What first opened your eyes to the intersection of technology, equity, and public policy?
So thanks for the question. It's in some ways multifaceted, or I could speak to specific experiences in my past that sort of when they came together, it painted the picture of sort of what the situation is. The first was just recognizing the absence of diversity in some sense in a lot of STEM spaces. This is something that I noticed since I was a student. So, being in grad school, being a computer scientist, whether that's just in a classroom or you're presenting a paper at a conference, you are very often uh, perhaps the only person of color, if not one of a few, just a sprinkling. And that continued to be present when I took up my professorship at Temple, where, as diverse as the campus is, when you enter the computer science department or you're just in the College of Engineering in general, that diversity isn't necessarily reflected. So that was the first sort of piece of the puzzle, first piece of the picture. And that actually started to motivate some of the work that I do that we can talk about a little later. Um, the recognizing the harm, however, really came out of sort of looking at research in some sense, but also just taking in what's happening around you, taking in the news, taking in happenings. You start to realize that there are times or ways that you found groups being harmed in ways that the statistics sometimes hide, right? You just see a number, and it's not until you do a deep dive that you realize that sure, a particular number in terms of how a certain technology or a system or service might be harming people, the number might look small, but when you take a deeper dive in that number, you realize, oh, there's an overrepresentation of one particular group, Black and brown communities or women or something else in this number that is again sort of covered over because the number itself might be appreciably small. So
Mhm.
it's sort of putting those two things together that kind of led me down this road, recognizing that the diversity was not present when these systems were being built and designed because you just did not have a whole lot of diverse representation in the field. And then recognizing that coming out of that, we had systems and products that could cause harm to these groups, in part because they were not involved in their creation and development.
Right. So, can you give us an example of one of these systems?
Absolutely. So we can take many directions here, but I'll start with perhaps one that might resonate with folks as we come out, as just came out of this pandemic. So a lot of folks in those early years of COVID became very familiar, if they weren't aware of it before, with these pulse oximeters, these little things that you clip on your finger, and it would report how oxygenated your blood is. Well, it turns out that those devices would misreport just how much oxygen was in the blood if the person using the device had darker skin.
Hmm.
Now, as a result of that, what you found, and this has been documented, is that there was greater harm and actually measurable deaths caused in Black communities because when the device would report on the oxygen level in the blood, it would report as higher than it actually was. And if you think back to the early days of COVID, think early 2020, it was a madhouse outside. So if you didn't have to go out, you didn't. And if this device was telling you that, oh, you're fine, and whatever your symptoms are, at the end of the day, you're still getting enough oxygen, then you may have decided not to seek intervention, and that respiratory distress would actually be your undoing. So that's a very practical and recent entry, I guess, into the long list of events where we find that technology was causing direct measurable harm to
Mm.
communities, to diverse, to minority communities, in part because, and this is something I always want to stress, right? It's not because the makers of these devices had any intention behind this. They didn't think they weren't so conniving as to say, okay, I know how I can get rid of these people I don't like. It's
Mhm.
simply that when these devices are being built and tested, there is a standard. There is a standard, and that standard is often defined by who's in the room. They look around, and everybody sort of has a certain persona, or they present a certain way, and those are the people who test it. They test it with their friends, they test it with their family, they test it with their networks and their groups, and at the end of the day, if again someone else isn't there to say, oh, it turns out this doesn't actually work for me and for my community and my friends and my family, then it goes
Mhm.
out the door, basically almost like a ticking time bomb. Because again, if had
Mm.
COVID not been what it was, this may never have made the news. This no no
Right,
one probably even realized or recognized it as an issue.
right, right.
Right. So
So,
again, it's kind of that, it's again, it's not, it doesn't require intention.
mhm.
In a way, it only requires ignorance or apathy for that harm to be affected.
Right. And I just want to be clear because this could go down a very slippery slope, this conversation, right? Back
Sure.
to days when we talked about, or,
Yeah.
that we know history will tell us, right,
You're
that
right.
there was this perspective that we were people of color, for example, or Black people were, well, not, no, not just Black people,
Right.
but
Right.
a number of different groups of people were different, had different physiology, biology, and therefore were somehow inferior to other groups, right? So I want to be clear about, yeah, like,
Right.
yeah,
So yeah, and the reason I generally don't take it that way is, well, first and foremost, I have no data or information to suggest it, but
okay,
also it's not necessary, right? It's almost like there's a saying, don't ascribe to malice what you can ascribe to incompetence, or something to that effect.
oh,
Which is
okay,
to say, yeah, which is
okay,
to say, this harm can happen even if you don't have that malintent, right? It's
hmm,
ultimately just saying, because I'm unaware and I leave it alone, then this happens. And there are a ton of examples. It's perhaps one of the earliest ones I can think of. I'll give you two examples that sort of touch on the same thing.
okay,
So many years ago, and I'd like to think it wouldn't happen today, but many years ago, there was this tech company, and I'm sure I'm going to forget to not say the name, and it'll mention it but I'm purposely trying to just keep this abstract.
Mm-hmm.
This technology company that created a new service where you could upload your photographs and it would automatically classify them. So you get these categories of photographs, makes it easier for you to browse. And there was this I don't remember if they were a couple or a brother and sister, but this young man and young woman who had taken a bunch of pictures of themselves and uploaded those pictures. And this image classifier said that they were either monkeys or gorillas or something to that
Mm-hmm.
effect.
Okay.
And you recognize that we know now, if we know very little about these artificial intelligence systems, what we do know is that they reflect the data that they're trained on, right? And if you have a system like this that doesn't isn't trained on a lot of images of black individuals, then when
Mm-hmm.
it does see an image of a black individual, it doesn't know what it's looking at necessarily. It sees characteristics and the thing that I saw that had dark skin was this thing. And in one sense, that's just a technical outcome of the system and the fact that it was the data that it was trained on versus not trained on. But then what is missing, if you only look at it from a technical perspective, is that history, right? Of black folks and immigrants and other groups being called monkeys, being called apes and chimpanzees and other types of simian, and how much harm that can cause, psychological damage that can cause. So they're uploading their picture and they see this classification. It's not funny, it's harmful.
Right.
Right, and who knows what that effect can be. And of course, this got fixed. It got changed eventually, but it only got changed when it made headlines.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize, had somebody been in the room who, the term they use is dog fooding. When you are in tech and you are building something and you test it on yourself,
Mm-hmm.
had there been more people of color in that room building it, being a part of that development team, and the statistics are abysmal. It's a few years ago Google put out their numbers and it was like 1.6% of their engineers were black. um so because they didn't have those people to test it, they didn't catch this early enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have these things now. It's bad PR for the company, if nothing else, but it's also harmful to these communities, and they're the ones who now have to deal with that. And the second example I'll give you, and it's only because it's relevant all over again today, is I remember this video that came out. This is now easily over 15 years ago. I'd have to go find the video source. It was this black guy sitting with his white coworker, and they're testing out this face tracking feature of a computer, a laptop or a desktop, whichever it was. But this had a webcam that would track your face as you moved left to right, and it was really awesome and cool. And they were making this very funny video at the time because what they found is that the camera would track the white coworker's face, but whenever the black guy got in frame, the camera just stopped working. And it was hilarious and it was funny. And they declared, this company is racist. Again, saying it tongue in cheek. But what we now see today is that these type of things actually can have direct harm. We know that, for example, self-driving cars, which use some combination of cameras as well as LiDAR and different things, depending on which manufacturer you're speaking of and model of vehicle you're speaking of. We
Mm-hmm.
actually know today that self-driving cars, while they do have lower numbers, and this is again one of those things where statistics hides the reality, they have lower number of accidents in general compared to cars driven by humans. But what gets underreported is the fact that even though the number is smaller, the people that tend to be hit and killed by self-driving vehicles or vehicles in any sort of semi-autonomous mode it tends to hit people with darker skin. They don't come up as readily in the systems, and whatever those algorithms are processing or whatever computer
Wow.
vision a mechanism is being used, it has trouble with darker skin. And recent tests have shown it also has problems with younger people,
Mm.
based on their height, I imagine. So you have all of these things where, again, if you just look at the data, you'll hear everybody say, well, self-driving cars are safer. Like, yeah, that might be true. But when it does go wrong, who's the group? Who's the one that is being harmed by this?
Right. And so that is in part because they're not a part of the clinical trial.
And
or at the decision making table.
they're not in the room to design it. They're not in the room to build it. They're not in the room to test it. And this is something that shows up in a lot of different places, right? So
Mhm.
if we're talking about race, then we sort of go down a path. But we also know that this happens, for instance, with women
Mhm.
in medical trials. They will oftentimes recruit men, white men, for what it's worth, to take part, or they're the ones who tend to take part in medical trials. And then when you have recommended dosages on those medicine containers, they are made on the premise of this is what this is the quintessential individual, a white man should take
Mhm.
this dosage. And what we found, and again documented, is that so when women would take this medication, the effects would be either stronger or last longer, etc. So take this drug and you'll feel drowsy for 4 hours. Well, for a woman, it might be 12 hours. And they
Yeah.
go out driving thinking that they're fine, but in reality, they're not. So they
Mhm.
have an accident or something else happens. And again, because the diversity was not there.
Right.
So individuals and groups were being negatively impacted without
Mm.
any intentionality, but simply because there was not because there wasn't intentionality in bringing these diverse perspectives and representations into the room,
Mhm.
you end up with this harm.
Yeah. And I just want to say this, like on the one hand, yes, if the world were a better place, yeah,
Mhm.
if we were conditioned as humans to think of groups other than ourselves,
Right. All right.
this
Yes.
wouldn't happen either.
Sure.
Today, we need representation.
Right.
And so
Uh,
we could, go ahead.
Yeah, and no, you're touching on a very interesting point, and that is why I never look at it as a way to cast blame or say this is
Hmm.
somebody's fault. It's almost human nature.
Hmm.
We even introspectively, sometimes it's hard for us to even look internally and understand our own motivations. We simply act,
Hmm.
and we tend to act in our own self-interest, even if we are not overtly trying to hurt or harm someone else. We act in our own self-interest, and those that we know, those that our friends, our
Hmm.
family, our neighbors.
Hmm.
That's just built into us.
Yeah. And so we have to be mindful. Man, there's so much information out there for people to just pick it up and read it. Just,
Yeah.
but we're moving very quickly. Um, and in my humble opinion, to our detriment at
Mhm.
sometimes because we are leaving humans behind, literally as collateral damage. We started this conversation talking about people dying
Right.
because they were overlooked. And I just wanted to also just go back there just 1 second, just to make sure I was clear that when I was talking about like I guess there were Black people who were disproportionately underreporting, or like they weren't as concerned about their blood pressure,
Uh,
right?
the blood oxygenation. Yeah.
The blood oxygenation. Oh,
Oxygenation. Yeah.
give me a
Yeah.
word that I couldn't.
Blood
Okay,
oxygen. Blood oxygen.
their blood oxygen.
Yeah.
It's the oxygen that's the issue. Okay,
Mhm.
so they were under.
Well, the devices
Say that
were
again.
over-reporting.
Over
Right. So
reporting.
you were experiencing respiratory distress. You were not getting enough oxygen into your blood, but the device was telling you that you are above whatever that threshold for worry was. So it's telling you
And
you have 98, 99, 100% oxygen, even though you're literally struggling to breathe.
right, and so just as the regular person that does not study these things,
Right.
I'm curious about the fact that if you did clinical trials on one certain group of people, like I understood that male female distinction you made
Right.
recently, but I'm like, based on race, we could literally have different levels of blood oxygen.
No, so it isn't the level of blood oxygen that would be different across races, and or if there is something to that, I'm unaware.
Right.
Simply that if a person with lighter, because the devices are meant to work well or better with lighter skin tone, it would view our darker skin as, for however the mechanism works, it sees that as there being oxygen in the blood.
Oh, this, okay. So
Right.
it's looking at the,
So had it been somewhat, had it been a white person experiencing the same thing and using the device, it would say, "Oh, your blood oxygen level is low." A black
mhm,
person would also have low blood oxygen, but the device would tell them that it was higher. So
gotcha.
we were the same in the sense that we're experiencing and dealing with the effects of COVID or whatever else,
Mhm.
but the device would give different readings.
Because it had something to do with the melanin in our
No,
skin.
correct.
Got it. All
Yeah.
right. Because I
All
was
right.
just,
Sorry, I wasn't clear about
no,
that.
no,
So that's
no,
an
no. That's
important point.
no, right, right. Because I was like, it's because I thought we were the same on the inside.
Oh,
We
oh,
spent a lot of years and legislation.
okay. Suggested,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that was in fact the issue. We were the
Okay.
same, but the device was treating it differently.
Right. I mean, this is a clear difference, right?
Yeah,
Like in the melanation in your skin. Okay.
right.
Good. Thank
And
you.
right.
Thank you.
And uh, there's this other aspect to it as well, right?
Okay.
There's this idea that, well, the technology misbehaves, and that's those are kind of the examples that I've touched on.
Hmm.
But they're also, I mean, ultimately, again, we're talking about human nature and sort of how we are innately. And there is also this piece where the technology, if not designed and built properly or built with certain type of considerations, uh, can can be an aid to those who themselves choose to act with ill intent towards different communities, right? So, an example. This is just a a conversation of all examples. An example is a few years ago, and this has now been they've now done work on this, but a few years ago, there was a ride sharing company, and so I'll make the distinction that they were these two were different, but one of the ride sharing companies uh, would have high rates of cancellation whenever a black person would try to hail one of the drivers. And I'll spare you the long version of this story, but it was found that when the drivers saw that it was a black passenger trying to hail them, they would often more so than with other groups, they would cancel the ride. They would not follow through. And this has all kind of deleterious effects, right? In some instances, I read that one article where they refer to this as the black tax, because you were being taxed your time, right? The story mentioned that for those folks who would take a ride sharing service to work in the mornings, they had to allot an extra 5 to 10 minutes because they are anticipating cancellations. So they have to get up earlier in the morning,
Mhm.
prepared for earlier, do everything earlier because they know when they try to hail they try to hail that service, they're going to get a cancellation. So they need to build that time in, because of course if they get to work late and they say, "Why weren't you here?" It's like, "Oh well, the service kept canceling." Like, your boss doesn't want to hear that, so
Mhm.
they had to build it in. So now they were losing time in a way that other people didn't. And there are all of these other examples, right? And then again, so these are people using the tool, using the technology to enable their own bias, their own discrimination, their own racism. It's enabling it. And then you think, well, how could that have been avoided before the headlines, before all the articles, before the stories? And you can Google this and you'll see the name of the companies. So I don't need to list them. And you
Mhm.
start to realize that, again, had there been this diverse representation in the room, anyone could have said, "Hey, so you may not know this because this is not your life, this is not your lived experience, but when or my father would tell me, or my grandfather would tell me that, hey, there was a time where you tried to wave down a cab and that cab would just drive right by you, and they'll go a block over and pick up a white guy on the other street, and this was life for us. How can we make sure that when we're building this app, this service, How can we make sure that this doesn't happen? How can we make sure, because that cab driver, they're still out there, and now they're
Mhm.
driving for us. They're going to use our app. How can we
Mhm.
make sure that we don't have the digital version of them pretending like they didn't see the guy waving them down and
Wow.
go a block
Mhm.
over?
Mhm.
And build those systems in. But you need to know, because if no one in the room knows this, if they don't, again, it's not their lived experience, and they don't have that generational knowledge being passed down to them,
Right.
then even without any intention, you are causing this type of harm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I get it. Right. This is the 2020s version of the same thing that past generations have
Oh,
experienced.
absolutely. And
Mhm.
and whether it's ride sharing, it's you not being able to live in a certain neighborhood, or you're not able to go to a certain hotel. You see that today with some of the rental services, where when you go to rent and they see your picture, they say, "Oh, it turns out we're not available that weekend."
Mhm.
Again, the people who build the services, they don't know about redlining. There isn't that generational knowledge being passed down to them. They don't hear those stories and know that black folks couldn't live in certain neighborhoods. Black folks couldn't be in certain neighborhoods at certain times of the day. So if that's not knowledge you have and an appreciation you have, and you don't know what you don't know, the only way to prevent this from happening is bringing everybody in and having them sit at the table and say, tell
Yeah,
us how this works for you. How can we make sure
right.
your community is served?
Right. What one thing that is well, there's two things that are key, right? That humans have blind spots,
Right.
period,
Yes.
right? And technology is developed by humans. It's developed by humans. So, right, like we just cannot eliminate human bias,
Yes. And, and
period.
and you're absolutely right. And in the case of artificial intelligence, again,
Yes.
it's trained on data. Whose data? Our data. It's
Mhm.
ours. So what we've done,
Mhm.
again, without regard, without intentionality, is injected our bias into these systems, and now these systems are very efficient at
Mhm.
expressing those biases.
Mhm.
And now it's so much harder to connect the dots, because nobody implicitly thinks the
Mhm.
computer is racist. Nobody thinks the
Right.
computer is sexist. Nobody
Correct.
thinks the computer is ageist. But
Mhm.
it is, because it's built on our assumptions, our information, our
Mhm.
biases.
Exactly. It's very interesting. And listen, don't get me wrong, I use it, right? So
Yeah.
I use it, but I am a very much a thinking and critiquing person.
All right. And
I will also, I'm trained to do research. I want to know where I need references. Yes.
absolutely.
And
Yes.
right. And I know the distinction between those that are reliable and not. I mean, we're
Right.
training people early in college, in their college education, how to do research, right?
Right.
And fact check and check the reliability of their sources even.
Right.
So, and there are many, many millions of people who don't have that experience
Right. And
either.
and like you, I'm not just a user, I'm a builder. Like, so I
Mhm.
work in the field of AI for about 15 years now, or back in the day, we just called it autonomous decision making. Now
Mhm.
AI is everywhere. So I build it, I work in it, and so it's not about, oh, AI is gloom and doom and here are the problems. It's quite the
Mhm.
opposite. It's how do we make sure that everybody benefits? How do we make sure
Yes.
that no one is harmed by this and no one is
Mm.
exploited by this technology?
Yes.
Whether that is the tech that we've been using for the last 5, 10, 20 years, or the technology we see ahead of us that is now becoming ubiquitous, that is now undergoing this rapid development and is going to
Mhm.
change society drastically. We
Mhm.
need to make sure that we're putting protections in place. We need to make sure that everybody is gaining equal access and equal benefits, and we have to do it right, and we have to do it now.
Yes. And I do appreciate, we have to do it and we have to do it now. And
Mhm.
I appreciate your perspective. I'm glad you gave us concrete examples related to our health, related to our time and energy. These are real, right? That could have even the example around the rideshare app affects someone's employment,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
I mean, excuse me. And, many United States Americans do understand the money, right? The impact on their pocket. Now,
Right.
let's talk about public policy, though.
Right.
You know, um, how do you see public policy shaping or failing to shape responsible and equitable technology development?
So at the end of the day, we live in a capitalist society.
Mhm.
And if a company, a publicly traded company, is building a product or a service, their only obligation, no matter what no matter what their ads say, no matter what anything say, if they're a publicly traded company, their only responsibility is to return value to shareholders. That's that's their fiduciary responsibility. If it will cost more to build protections into a system, if it will cost more to build environmental considerations, health considerations, considerations for race and ethnicity, for gender identity, for immigrants, that for whatever it is,
Mhm.
if it'll cost them more and reduce profitability, and they don't have to do it, there should be no expectation that they will. Public
Mhm.
pressure can do it, but so often that is hidden. It's not evident. It's not obvious the impact that it has. And there's so many examples. I'm reluctant to name them all because I haven't necessarily gone and done my own research and gotten my my citations. But certainly there are tons of examples out there where it would be good if we had the right type of social pressure to move a company in a certain direction, but it doesn't always happen, or doesn't happen quickly enough. And outside of the public pressure that might force, because that impacts a company's bottom line, the only other recourse and the only other entity that can act here is various legislatures, whether that is uh, local, state, or federal. And at the end of the day, for some of these larger companies and these tech companies, especially, are multinational corporations. You are talking legislation at the federal level, ultimately, if you're trying to have any real impact and have any real effect. So, and we've seen examples of this. Lots of times it comes out of different entities, not necessarily the United States, but perhaps coming out of the EU, where we saw uh, they had very strong opinions on e-waste, the type of waste and environmental impact that technology was bringing, and they, for example, thumbed the scale as it related to standardizing the way that our cell phones and our devices could be charged. So many people, if they weren't plugged into the news, they might have seen a transition for, and I'll name a product because this happens. They might have seen a transition for iPhones and Apple devices. They now use USB-C, whereas before they were using their own proprietary technology. The reason
Yes.
that switch happened was the EU, the European Union. They
I,
basically said, we can't have all these cables. We can't have 50 different ways of charging devices. So we're going to pick a standard and everybody's going to build to this standard. And that's why we have it today. That's why you can just plug one cable now into anything. And similarly, so that's you know that's so that's a plus for the environment. That's a plus for waste management. Similarly, and just to stick to the cell phone example, so there's always been this rift, for example, with Android and iPhone when it came to things like messaging and the dreaded green bubble.
Mhm.
And maybe I take it personally because I'm an Android user. I teach mobile development using Android. Um, but there was never a technical limitation that prevented, proper message interoperability. It was purely a marketing and business decision. How do we get
Mhm.
people to switch to our brand instead of the others? Make it difficult, remove interoperability, and basically apply social pressure through our own customers to outside groups so that they decide to switch. but what they fail to either realize or to care about is, well, who tends to have Android devices? You know, they fill a spectrum, but they you can find an Android device on the cheaper end price of the price scale.
Hmm.
So when someone has an Android device, it may be a choice. You know, I choose to
Hmm.
have an Android device, but it may also be situational. It may be circumstantial. Maybe you just can't get another device. But if you're being bullied, or if you're being pressured, or if you're not in the group chat because the folks who have the other device have decided they're going to make fun of you, like
Hmm.
that type of thing, again, that doesn't, we all know it, but we don't think of that social that the social impact, the psychological impact of a business decision that this other company has made.
Hmm. Right.
So it takes because again, this is where society failed to hold the company accountable. This is a bad user experience for everyone. But instead
Mm.
of holding the company accountable and saying, hey, building the interoperability, sometimes it needs the government is the one who has to come in and say, hey, we have these two platforms. These are the most popular. And
Right.
there's no technical reason why you cannot have proper communication between these devices. You need to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So we oftentimes see these things again coming out of Europe when we should be doing those things here, or at least doing them first, and not having to wait. So we saw some movement by DOJ in this area. Now we do see interoperability built in, but this could have been done 10, 15 years ago.
Correct.
Instead, we only saw it in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So government does play a huge role in ensuring that there is a type of fairness and a type of equity.
Right. As
Um, yeah,
access. Yeah.
exactly.
Accessibility.
Right. If there is an awareness of it,
Mhm.
and that's oftentimes what is missing, where
Mhm.
people just don't connect the dots, especially as the world and the technology that powers it becomes more and more complicated. Sometimes it's hard to connect the dots, but sometimes it isn't. And you just need political will to
Mm.
sort of say, well, we have to move in this direction. We have to fix this problem.
That is such useful information. I'm still stuck on the fact that the iPhone uses now, I'll say it, I'll say,
I think I said it too.
uses that USC, or what was it called? The
USB, USB.
well, no, the C, where they said we couldn't have the
Yeah,
E.
yeah. USB-C is the standard.
Yeah, the USB-C.
Yes.
Yes, sorry. Because
That's all
of
right.
course I notice it when I get a new device and I'm like,
Right.
okay, now it's changed again. However, I
Right.
appreciate it now that I have this explanation.
Right. And
Right.
now you plug everything. So everything in my house is
Right.
USB-C as best as I can. Everything
Yes.
plugs into everything else, and it's a better world because of it.
I appreciate that. And so I appreciate our connection across the world. Yeah. Right.
Right.
I wish more individuals cared more about people than they do money. I
Right.
understand businesses need money to thrive. I just wonder how sustainable they will be in at the end of the day,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like how sustainable they will be until we get that part right.
Yeah, and and
Yeah.
and you know, it's about balance, right? I am
Mhm.
I am I am pro business. I'm pro innovation. Like, go
Yeah,
out there,
same,
build and amaze us. But at
same.
the end of the day, and this is where I think the government comes in. They have to make sure that citizens are being protected,
Right.
and so that should be the agreement. You go off and do what you need to do, but we're gonna make some rules for the road. And
Yeah.
these are the things these are the lines you can't cross. We need to make sure
Hmm.
that people are being treated fairly, people are being treated equitably, nobody's being harmed, and everybody benefits.
Everybody
If the
benefit.
government does that and does that well, then go ahead and let private industry create this world that we want. That's it.
Yes,
And everybody has a role, everybody has a job.
everything excellent. Yes, thank you. I love that. So, Carl, what's one action step each of us can take this week in our homes, our communities, our workplaces to ensure technology is advancing humanity rather than eroding it?
That's a tricky one.
Okay.
It's there's a kind of, I mentioned it earlier, it's not something
Mhm.
that we all engage in a lot, but there is
Mhm.
an introspection that needs to sort of happen, a recognition of who you are, what motivates you, and far too often we simply look at the benefits that we get, and we do not. It's not that we do not care necessarily. Sometimes it's just that we do not know or appreciate where other people are with regards to these things. And I think if we start with a bit of introspection and then extend that into a bit of empathy, like not everybody is getting the same benefits I'm getting. And this technology that I'm utilizing, that I'm benefiting from, may actually be causing harm to other individuals. And then you can start to ask the question of yourself and do the work. Like, what can I do to change this? And
Mhm.
if nothing else, sometimes that work may simply be to lobby and to advocate. Not everybody's going to be able to roll up their sleeves and fix things themselves, but it's about advocating for the change that you feel needs to happen. So we're now in a world where we see like this ramp up of artificial intelligence in everything. And
Mhm.
we could have a much longer conversation about how that's going to change and what that's going to look like in the near future, near to medium term future. But right now for us, AI is these things where we type in prompts and we get something back. And these models, these systems, they're getting bigger, they're getting more powerful. And what we might know, what we might have heard tangentially, and whether it resonated with us or it just went in one ear and out the other, is that,
Mhm.
for example, these things have huge power demands. So I'm trying to bring this back sort of to the overall theme of our conversation, which is the racial and minoritized exploitation that tends to happen in
Mhm.
a lot of times in the world of technology. So we know that these models have these huge power demands. Well, what we should also recognize is that power has to come from somewhere, right? And it would be nice if we just had renewable energy sources everywhere, but due to political will or the political wins as they were, that is not currently the focus.
Mhm.
So what we instead have, or what we instead see, are things like coal and natural gas, and these things being used, either they're being built, or perhaps a planned decommissioning has been canceled because so we now have these dirty fuel sources powering these data centers that keep these AI models running. Well, the question becomes, well, where are these power sources? Where where
Mhm.
where where do they tend to be built? Well,
Mhm.
they're built in urban areas. They're built in areas where a lot of black folks might live, a lot of black and brown folks might reside, folks just lower on the socioeconomic ladder, who don't have the political voice to stand up and say this is not what I want, and in
Mhm.
some cases just not even the realization of what's happening. But why is this bad? It's bad because these power centers, these data centers, and these power plants. Somehow I push those two things together. Well, if you're burning coal, or you're doing these other traditional fossil fuels, this has a direct impact, negative impact on the air quality.
Right.
So what you now see is, if you choose to follow the line and connect the dots, what you now see is that higher use of artificial intelligence in one instance results in poor air quality in certain communities. And that poor air quality leads to kids having asthma and other respiratory illnesses.
Mhm.
So now the question is, so do you connect the dots between AI and asthma? Most people probably wouldn't, but there's a direct connection there. But when you stop and think about it, the question becomes, even if you didn't make that direct connection, we do know that these things can harm individuals, they can harm communities. So this is where you can now start to say, well, here's something I can advocate for. We
Mhm.
need to push for renewable energy, and we need to make sure that we're not, in the meantime, we're not exploiting different groups.
Right.
It's essentially the same groups that have been exploited throughout history, the ones
Mhm.
who just didn't care about, the ones who can just deal with the fallout while everybody else benefits. So
Mhm.
those are the things that you can start to do today. Look at what you are benefiting from and ask, is everybody else benefiting the same
Mhm.
way? And if not, what can I do? What steps can I take? Whether it's political or otherwise. Maybe it's going to work, volunteering with a nonprofit who you know is trying to fix these things. Or coming up with your own plan of action. That can take different forms. Become an advocate, become an ally to these groups who
Yes.
work for us.
Yes.
So it's complicated, but there is a path, and the path may be different for everyone.
Yeah, Karl, you have raised my consciousness, my awareness around a number of issues today. So I can imagine for many people, this is going to be a very informative episode. I want to thank you. I heard you say, hey, think about, uh, things like renewable energy. And, that's going to be on the ballot in many places.
Absolutely.
I I'm always looking at education and to be honest, right? So you raise my awareness in a way that helps me make a more informed decision too, right?
I'm glad.
And I heard you also, I had a couple of takeaways. Question the defaults, right? Ask who designed this and who might be missing from that room.
Absolutely.
Diversified decision making, representation at the table must be a reality.
Yeah, we need to move away from this thought process that DEI is a box you check, a quota system. No, it's about building better products that serves everyone.
That's right. I even heard below that because, I'm listening for how we educate our young people, teach our young people things like coding and creation are acts of our cultural authorship.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
advocate, especially locally, support leaders and policies that prioritize digital equity and ethical tech use.
absolutely. I couldn't have
Yes.
said it better myself.
Oh, awesome. Well, I was listening. So, Karl, are there any final words of advice or resources you would like to share with our listeners before we go?
Absolutely. So it's in the broadest sense, I would say stay connected and stay informed on what's important and what is happening.
Hmm.
So often, and I will never try to devalue what sort of gets to us, but so often we get caught up in the big headlines, the whatever is happening with an administration or the government, or wherever troops are being deployed. And this is absolutely important. We have to stay involved. We have to stay connected to these things, and we have to take actions where we believe that harm is doled out to individuals. But also, don't let these other things slip through the cracks, and stay connected to them. When we see, for example, that a report a couple of weeks ago that artificial intelligence is going to be used for decision making in Medicare. There's a pilot program that's going to start in 2026. We have to ask. Well, we know that there's bias in artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
If we start to use AI to make determinations about which procedures get covered or which claims will be denied, who's likely to be harmed here? And then start to ask questions. Okay, what is the oversight, or where is the oversight? Congress, are you looking at this? And again, advocate for this. Make sure that uh, we and not just responding to it after we see the harm happening, but being proactive. And
Yeah.
there are tons of examples like this. It's sort of, it's staying connected and understanding what's happening in the world, because there is a lot happening. That's one example. Again, if we get, let's give me 30 more minutes and we'll go through a bunch more. But in the last 6 to 9 months, there's been so much of this that has happened. The federal government saying that any AI company that wants to work with the federal government cannot have considerations for minoritized groups. You cannot consider Black and Brown communities. You cannot consider seniors. You cannot consider women or immigrants. And then you're saying that these AI companies are going to make determinations for Medicare?
Right.
How is that? Like we know what's going to happen.
It is.
So we need to stay connected and then take action. And again, that action can be who are the legislators that you're putting in office that can help
Mhm.
address these things. So,
Yes.
maybe that's a plug, maybe. But the point is, make sure that we're trying to address these things because if they are left unaddressed, we're going to see the same thing we saw in the last 30 years, but at such an accelerated pace and with coming at us from so many other directions that in just a few more years, if we don't do something now, it may be too late.
Yeah.
We just can't rein it in. So now is the time.
Yeah. And we need more people to help educate the masses because this is a lot of information moving quickly.
It is.
Yeah.
It is easy to get overwhelmed. I
Oh,
fully
yes.
appreciate that. So
Yeah.
it's about keeping track of what's important and not getting distracted.
That's right. Yes. And we need support to do that, I tell you.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you, Karl, I want to thank you so much for spending time with me and this Rooted to Thrive tribe.
Thank you very
Uh,
much for having me.
yes. Can you tell our listeners how they can find you after this episode?
Absolutely. So generally, I sort of just chronicle a lot of the work that I do on my website, it's kamorris.com, kamorris.com. And of course, I am currently a candidate for Pennsylvania's 3rd congressional district.
Mhm.
That election is in 2026, May 19, 2026. You can find out more about some of my policies, some of my policy positions, and a lot of the stuff that I talked about today form a huge part of my policy. And these are the type of things I want to help address. So you can find more about me and my candidacy at karlforcongress.us. So that's Karl with a K, FOR congress.us. And so just find out more about my campaign.
Excellent. Thank you, Karl Morris. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I want to thank everyone who stopped by and those who listened to the end. If you haven't already, please subscribe and share this episode. I really appreciate you coming by, listening, thinking more deeply, and know that next time you come by, I'll be here to welcome you, just waiting, just to welcome you back to Rooted to Thrive.